Now here's something that's baffled me for some time. Ask anyone what Peter Jackson's best film is, and odds are they'll answer, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, of course. What else? While I'm not a particularly avid fan of the Lord of the Rings films, I've never denied that they are incredible cinematic achievements in their own right for reasons I don't have to explain. However, I've always seen them as a tad overrated, especially when compared to the film that I'm reviewing today. Peter Jackson's King Kong is, hands down, one of the strongest monster movies of all time, one of the most respectable remakes ever, and in my eyes, Peter Jackson's best film to date. It doesn't have the grand scale, unfathomably spectacular battle sequences of the Lord of the Rings films, but it does have several other elements that I personally find to be more important. I don't think it's necessary for me to talk about the story of King Kong, since pretty much anyone who's ever seen a movie is familiar with it, but I will point out some changes that Jackson included that actually seem to expand the story. The first is the quote-unquote prologue that shows exactly why Ann Darrow, played by Naomi Watts, and Carl Denham, played by Jack Black, are in the situations they are in. Whereas in the original film we first see Anne contemplating the theft of an apple, here she is shown to be a performer in a theater that was recently shut down, and during the Great Depression to boot. It establishes the character better and enables the audience to sympathize with her, setting the foundation for the rest of her story. Carl Denham is shown to be a self-promoting filmmaker that has lost the confidence of studio executives that believe his films are a waste of their funding. Narrowly escaping them, following a failed proposition, Denham remains committed to completing his picture, and in the process of finding a lead actress, he runs into Anne. Comparing this scenario to the one in the original, I can't say I prefer one over the other, for reasons I don't have time to explain, but I certainly like Anne's additional history, for reasons I don't have to explain. Anyway, the voyage to Skull Island is also expanded. Whereas in the original film we merely hear Anne talk about how the voyage had been the happiest time of her life, here we actually see her interact with the crew members for several sequences. Recently, I also realized that there are little references to the original film within the production of Denham's film. For example, the scene where the Denham films of Anne talking to Bruce Baxter at the side of the ship comes straight out of the 1933 King Kong film, and the recreation of the ritual of the natives near the end of the film utilizes the same music from the real ritual in the 1933 film. But anyway, some people believe these additional scenes are superfluous and only gave the film an excessive length, but I personally thought they expanded the story quite well, and even bolstered the characterization. I didn't find them to be overdrawn or boring, except maybe the romantic scenes between Anne and Jack, but these are thankfully scarce. Many of the expansions weren't necessary, but they certainly didn't hurt, which makes this a respectable version of the timeless story of the original film. The characterization of King Kong is also quite commendable, in my opinion the principal element that uplifts this film beyond Peter Jackson's other projects. As implied earlier, the character Ann Darrow is explored to a greater degree here, in no small part thanks to her interactions with Kong himself. Naomi Watts really did a good job here with this role, conveying the relative naivety of the character as well as bringing other aspects of Anne to light, including improvisation. Jack Black, to me at least, was not the best choice for a character like Denham, but he nonetheless embodies the ambitious filmmaker respectably, bringing out a more conniving attribute that makes Denham the guy you love to hate. Adrien Brody as Jack Driscoll is a whole other story. Comparing this Driscoll to the first one, I definitely consider the latter to be more effective. Why? Because he wasn't played by Adrien Brody. That's why. But this is only a small snag within this aspect of the film. The rest of the characters in the film, including the skipper, Mr. Hayes, and the rest of the crew, are not particularly well developed, but they are fun to watch. Partially because of how they compare to the crew from the original film, and partially due to the overdramatic moments they are involved in. Conversely, I didn't really find several of the main characters in the Lord of the Rings films interesting, thus giving King Kong a notable edge over that trilogy. But of course, the best character in the film is the main attraction, Kong himself. I once read an interesting statement in a review by Forrest Frued concerning the monster Gamera, but I find it to be more applicable here. King Kong may not have the indestructibility of Godzilla or the umpteen billion laser beams of Mothra Leo, but what he does have is character, which in and of itself is something notable that I bet most people don't think about. Enabling a giant movie monster to express sentience and emotions is exceedingly difficult to do, and King Kong is one of those pertinent success stories. I love how, initially, Kong is portrayed as a relentless beast that exists only to instill fear, but as the film progresses, we see a more curious side to him, the way he inspects Anne like a toddler inspects a new toy. I also like how their relationship evolves through the course of the second and third acts of the film, and it never degrades to anything creepy or unsettling like in the 1976 remake. Rather, it has a kind of poetry to it that I can't really describe and can only be found in such stories as Beauty and the Beast. Certainly no coincidence there. The closest the Lord of the Rings trilogy ever came to portraying interactions as interesting as these was with those between Smeagol and his counterpart Gollum. Ultimately, just like the original film, we end up sympathizing with the monster because virtually no one understands him. Here, Anne is the only one that does, and that provides the motivation that leads to his downfall. It's quite tragic when you think about it, and grants this film real emotional resonance that, again, the Lord of the Rings trilogy rarely saw. This is the film that will show you exactly why Kong was one of the most fascinating monsters to ever grace the big screen. Now as for the special effects and music, I can't really find much to complain about. Virtually every setting is great to look at. I particularly like the portrayal of New York at the beginning and end of the film. It really gives a sense of life during the Great Depression that the original film did not have. But then again, that picture was intended as escapist entertainment that, if only for a short while, enabled people to forget about the troubles of the Depression. So naturally the depictions wouldn't reflect the time period. Anyway, the ship and Skull Island also look pretty darn good as settings, and the waters surrounding the island really help build up the atmosphere upon arrival. Kong, of course, looks absolutely fantastic, and I honestly think that his incredibly expressive face alone should have merited the animators an Oscar nomination. The original scores of the film throughout are an absolute delight to listen to, and what's more, they complement their respective scenes terrifically and emphasize the significance of certain scenes, one of my favorites being Anne boarding the ship. The music does not have the grandness of the soundtrack of some of Jackson's other films, but it is just effective because it has a subtlety to it that grants an appropriate type of strength. The only real problem I have with either of these two cinematic elements is the animation for some of the dinosaurs, particularly the sauropods. These animals looked rather fakish, and even though their stampede is thrilling, it's a bit too over the top, especially during the conclusion. But you know what really makes up for it? Kong vs. 3 T-Rexes. Definitely one of the best brawls ever put on screen. Ultimately, even though King Kong was well received, it definitely didn't receive as much credit as it deserved. Most people don't seem to still mention it, and on the Internet Movie Database, it currently holds a score of 7.6, below such obviously inferior films as Transformers and 300. I really hope people will someday take another look at this movie, because it really is a respectable achievement that garnered some notable acclaim, even from James Rolfe. And believe me, if he thinks a monster movie is good, it probably is. Even though it doesn't surpass its classic predecessor for various reasons, it remains the most commendable modern adaptation, and a good means of appreciating a timeless classic through the eyes of the filmmaker it inspired.